I'm going to preface my remarks by saying that this practice of using the law to silence people or punish people is a disturbing trend in society. You see it in politics and everything else, and you see it in the attacks on different politicians and so on. So, and they're what are called SLAPP lawsuits. That's an acronym for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. Why have I received lawsuits? Why not all the other skeptics out there that have challenged what's being said? Why have they focused on me? I'd like to think it's because I'm the most brilliant guy in the world, but you know me enough to know that that's nowhere near the truth. And but the answer is, of course, that they couldn't say, as they often do, oh, well, you're not qualified. I am qualified. Notice, by the way, nobody ever says to Al Gore, are you qualified? That's one of those questions that only goes in one direction, and that tells you something about what's going on here. So they couldn't say I wasn't qualified, and then, of course, I had the history to defend and reject everything that they were accusing me of. So I ended up with 3 lawsuits, all from the same lawyer, all from members of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's the United Nations agency that's pushing all of this garbage. And so the first lawsuit, my wife and I said we can't afford to fight it, and we just simply withdrew what I wrote. So that turned out to be a good thing, ironically, because a few months later we got a second lawsuit, and the wife and I said, we're not going to be legally bullied. We're going to fight this. And I got as you and I know, without your family support, you can't do an awful lot. And so my family backed me and said, no, we're going to fight this. So I went and got a lawyer and responded to the first lawsuit, which was brought by a Professor Andrew Weaver. Now, Weaver was a professor of climate modeling at the University of Victoria. He didn't have any training in climatology, and I knew the first time I interviewed him that he knew nothing. But this is the problem. They create a climate model, and somehow suddenly now they're a climate expert. And so Weaver left university and went and ran for the Green Party here in British Columbia, and became the leader of the Green Party, and is now sitting in our legislature as a member of the Green Party. So his political bias, of course, is disclosed by all of that. But the lawsuit he brought against me, I won that one. The court threw that out. So that was the first victory. The second lawsuit, which came shortly after the Weaver one, was brought again by the same lawyer on behalf of Michael-E-Mann. And of course, Michael-E-Mann was at the University of Virginia, and had produced this hockey stick, this model of climate that in fact was complete fake news. He completely rewrote the climate history. And of course, I knew immediately as soon as I saw it what that was wrong and what was wrong with it. So of course started open attacks on it. And the next thing I know, I get a lawsuit from Mr. Mann. And by the way, in the meantime, he'd moved to Penn State. And the lawsuit was defamation lawsuit, as they all are, which tells you an awful lot about attacks on free speech. I had given a presentation of what Mann had done and how he'd done it, how he created this graph and how completely false it was. For example, he used one tree ring record for 1,000 years, and then he adds on to that the instrumental record like this, creating this hockey stick shape. Well, it's completely scientifically illegal to attach data from one source to another source, yet that's what he did. So anyway, I in an interview after making a public presentation of this, I was asked about Mann, and I flippantly said, well, he's at Penn State, maybe he should be at State Penn, which I thought was pretty good, but he wasn't amused. And so within hours, I had a lawsuit from him. That lawsuit was scheduled to go for trial on February 20th of 2017. And they backed out. Mann himself backed out on that trial date. Yet he's now accusing me of not being willing to respond and delaying the thing. But the trial was scheduled again, and again he just weaseled out on it. He just backed right out on it. So he's had almost 9 years to prepare for the case and to present his arguments, and I'm ready to go at any time he wants. But he's just simply dropped the whole case, and now he's going on the internet saying that I'm the one that's caused the delay, and that I'm not willing to go to court with it. I'll meet him anywhere, anytime that he wants. Just name it, I'll be there. But anyway, that's where we are now, and of course, as I said, he's got a PR campaign going on there saying that I'm the weasel, I'm the one that won't face up to the realities. And so now I just sent an email to my lawyer where we're preparing a response to this to go out on the internet to say what the actual truth is. So that's where we are. That's what the lawsuits were all about. Unfortunately, when we got the first lawsuit, the wife and I agreed we'd spend all our savings on the lawyers, and we don't regret that. We knew what we were doing, and I'm so grateful for family. But then after that, once particularly a John O'Sullivan over in England, who's been battling this for a long time too, and he's helped me set up a website and get PayPal, and I got a lot of donations from people to help with the legal costs. But I particularly got a great deal of help from a hedge fund manager in New York by the name of Bob Mercer, and he just said, look, I'll provide all the legal funds you want. And I said, look, talk to my lawyer. I don't want to touch any of the money. And so he arranged it with my lawyer. And Mercer's only comment to me was, Michael Mann's a charlatan and needs to be exposed. And so that's what we've been working on, and that's what we achieved through the courts here when the judge completely dismissed his case against me. Consensus applies in politics. It doesn't apply in science. All right? And the use of that word immediately tells you that the comment is political, not scientific. Okay? So as Einstein said, I can have 100 experiments to prove I'm right. One experiment proves me wrong, it's all over. Okay, so consensus simply does not apply. And the minute they started using that, then I knew and people sensed that it was political. The 97% figure was preceded by a 95% figure. And that came from a woman by the name of Naomi Oreskes, Oreske. And she decided that if she could show that a consensus of scientists agreed, that then made it valid. And so she came up with this 95% figure. The way she achieved that was that she went and got about 930 abstracts of articles about global warming and counted them all up and said, by her definition, 95% of them agree that global warming due to humans is proven. Okay, now Al Gore used her statistic in his movie, which shows you how false it was. I mean, as soon as Gore uses something, you know it's wrong, right? It's just the touch of death. But anyway, that was the first figure. The 97% figure came out of Queensland University, a scientist or professor by the name of John Cook, who has been totally opposed to this global warming thing from the start and has been getting huge amounts of research funding to argue the opposite side. And of course, that's what you got to look at. What's the source of your funding? And Cook took 14,000 articles, looked at the abstracts, and then defined categories for them, and said that of all of them that he looked at, 97% agreed that global warming due to humans was occurring. Now, since then, Lord Monckton of Benchley, who's a really strong skeptic, he went and looked at the same articles, and by his using Cook's definitions, said, look, less than 4% of them are agreeing that climate change due to humans is occurring. So here you've got these distinct differences. But by that time, the 97% figure had come out in an academic journal, and therefore got picked up by the promoters and people like Obama and all the politicians. So it became the number of the day, and as you say, they're all quoting it. But all you have to say is, look, sorry, consensus doesn't work in science. That's a political comment. The IPCC is an acronym for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a subagent of the United Nations Environment Program. The United Nations Environment Program was set up by Maurice Strong, the Canadian, who said, look, the problem for the planet are the industrialized nations, and isn't it our responsibility to get rid of them? And that quote of his is in a book by Elaine Dewar called Cloak of Green. Dewar said to him, well, you know, that's a pretty ambitious idea to get rid of the industrialized nations. She said, are you going to run for politics? And he said, you can't do anything as a politician, which is probably the only true statement he ever made. But she said, well, then what are you going to do? And he said, and again, this is quoted directly from her book, I'm going to go to the United Nations where I can get all the money I want from wherever I want and not be accountable to anybody. And of course, that's what we're seeing in the world, is the use of the UN as a mindless, unaccountable agency to push policies on people, particularly socialist policies on people. So that's what he did. He went to the UN and he set up the agenda. It's called Agenda 21, and that means it's the agenda for the whole energy and environment policy for the world into the 21st century. And of course, it starts with the basis that industry is the big problem, and that we've got to get rid of industry and we've got to stop development. Ironically, of course, and this sort of jumps to the end of the story, the best way to reduce pollution and to reduce excessive use of resources is to develop. And people can go and look up a thing called the demographic transition. This was a study that came out in the 1960s that showed that any developed country, as it developed, the population leveled off and started to decline, as you see in the United States, for example, where the natural birth rate is so low that you have to have immigrants to fulfill the workforce. And so the demographic transition shows that the best way to reduce the population and to reduce resource use is by development. That's the contradiction of it. And yet that's what they were trying to stop, was to stop development. So the very thing that was the solution to their problem, they saw as the problem. And so what Strong did was he set up this Agenda 21, and in the Agenda 21 was the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. He was the first chair of that. Maurice Strong was the first chair of that. And the first meeting of that was held in Rio in 1992. And in 1992, the Rio Declaration was the first time they came out and said that human CO2 is causing global warming, and we've got this runaway problem, and we've got development problems, and we've got to change the whole direction of the world. Rio was, in fact, a disguised attempt to socialize the whole world, to create a one world government. Because what they were arguing at Rio was that these problems are affecting the whole globe, therefore no one nation can deal with them. It can be only dealt with by a single government. Therefore, what they were talking about was I said, one world government. So that was in 1992, and that was what Maurice Strong did. As a part of the Agenda 21, he set up two sides to it. One was the political side, which of course you see these meetings. They just had one recently in Geneva where they come out and say, oh, this is the climate issue is terrible. We've got to deal with it. It's got to be, socialism is the only solution. And then he set up the second side of it, which was the science side of it. And he set that up through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, everybody thinks that it's looking at and talking about total climate change. It's not. It was given the definition of you only look at human causes of climate change. So this way they narrowed it. And by the way, this is something, I think we've talked about this briefly before, but one of the things that I used to think was commissions of inquiry were brilliant things. Yeah, finally we get the politics out of the issue, and we'll get to the nub of the issue, and we'll get independent people in to look at it. The very first commission of inquiry I was appointed to or asked to serve on, I said, fine. It's a water issue. It's very controversial. It's very political. So I'm quite happy to come in with a neutral voice and just look at the facts and look at the realities. But immediately we got the terms of reference from the government, and the terms of reference were such that they strictly directed you to only one solution. That's how they do it, through the terms of reference. It's like when I was watching, it was the head of the Warren Commission, the guy that was put in charge of the investigation of the Kennedy assassination, which is one of the great conspiracy theories even today. And they said, the interviewer was on ABC News just before he died, and they said to Warren, well, why didn't you look at the mafia connection in Dallas with Jack Ruby and all of that stuff? And he very calmly said, it wasn't in my terms of reference. And I knew exactly what he was saying. But of course, for the majority of people, it went right over their heads. In other words, he was told, don't go there. That's not in your purview. So in other words, the Warren Commission inquiry was directed to find the results that they found. But because of course, it didn't answer all the questions, it continues to be one of the great conspiracy theories of the internet today. And so that's why every time you look at any commission of inquiry, don't or immediately know that whoever is setting up that commission of inquiry is going to limit them and predetermine the outcome through the terms of reference that they're given. So if you see a commission of inquiry, the immediate question you ask is, what's the terms of reference? And that will tell you all you need to know about what they're trying to do and how they're trying to manipulate it. And of course, when you look around the world, all the politicians, oh, well, we'll have a commission of inquiry, and everybody goes, whoa, thank goodness. In fact, they're taking more control, not less, but the public think they're giving up control. It's the greatest deception that there is. He's just saying that all of the science of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is correct and accurate, and that CO2 is the cause and we've got to get rid of industry and so on. He doesn't provide any evidence to support that other than quoting the IPCC, of which he is a member. Okay, so there's a self-interest and so on involved in that. The other problem that you have, and I'm speaking about this in very general terms, and you know this in its human nature, it's very, very difficult and almost unlikely that a person who's held a particular view for a long time and has built a career and made a lot of money off of it is going to turn around and say, no, what I said was wrong. That takes a true human being to do that. Right. And so, of course, Michael Mann has pushed this particular false argument. And so he's going to defend it to the death. Maybe I shouldn't use that term, but certainly he's going to fight very hard to keep it going. And so this is the problem. And he is what people call me a skeptic, when what I'm doing is saying, look, present both sides of the argument and let the public make up their own mind. What they're doing is saying, no, there is only one side to the argument, right? And it says, well, how do you know that? Well, because the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said there's only one side. Well, who's on that? Well, I happen to be on that. I mean, it's so incestuous. And so wrong, but this is going on around the world. This is happening in every country and the UN, and it's why the public are at a point where they simply don't believe anybody. And here's the bizarre thing about that. I happen to think that's a very healthy position to be in. Right? You just say, no, sorry, I don't trust you, and that's a good place to start from. Right. And what am I telling you this for? You know all about this. Okay. So this is what's going on. And Michael Mann, of course, is continuing to try to defend the indefensible. But all he's doing is exposing how weak his case is. But as I said, it's his whole career. It's what he's built his whole life around. And so, as I said, in a human way, I can understand. But in terms of what's right for society and what's right for science, where you take all the human and emotional and just, what's that, Sherlock Holmes, just the facts. Give me the facts. That's where we're at. And so, as I said, Michael Mann, and the problem is that, of course, he's accusing people of being political with this, when in fact he's been more political about it than anybody. And that's a blindness that is just unacceptable in the scientific community. We've got to keep politics separate from science.